Dr. Laffey is going to speak on gender in the management of ARDS.
Thanks very much, Chairman. So these are my conflict slides. I don't have any conflict in regard to gender or being married and having 3 daughters. So the first thing is we tend to use the term gender and sex interchangeably, or at least I used to until very recently, but of course they're not. Right? Gender is a social construct, whereas sex is a biological one. And so I'm really going to talk about sex differences in ARDS, not gender differences. So we've known for a long time that there are differences in how men and women are treated and managed in different conditions. And I guess the key is being trying to understand what that means, why it happens, and does it really matter a lot. And this is work from nearly 30 years ago now, where they looked at access to cardiac interventions. This is a cohort in Maryland and Massachusetts. And what you see is that the male patients are about 1.4 times more likely to have, at that time, a cardiac catheterization if they had an infarct or if they had any heart disease compared to their female counterparts. But it's a complex question. This is data, again from the US, looking at the aggressiveness of management of patients with intracerebral hemorrhage-induced stroke. And what you see is the male patients had more procedures and more surgery, more interventions. But when you actually looked at they were sicker and they had bigger hemorrhages. And so when you actually corrected for all of those things, there was really no difference. So there are potential explanations for why one sex might have more or less interventions than the other. So at least in this cohort, for intracerebral hemorrhage, there was no difference in terms of the likelihood of interventions or the aggressiveness of care when you standardized for severity of illness. This is more data looking at the differences in a myocardial infarction population. And what they saw in this cohort was that females presented later to the emergency department. They had less of the classic typical chest pain leading to MI, so they were diagnosed later. But even when you account for those, they had a 1.6 times greater likelihood of dying in hospital from their myocardial infarction. And in terms of the critically ill, we don't have a lot of data about the effect of sex, but this is an interesting paper from Australia, again a very large cohort, Austria I should say. And what they saw in summary was that there was a higher severity of illness in women. The intensivists did more things to the men, and outcome was equal, which I'm not sure if that tells you about the worth of some of the things we do in ICU. So I guess you should be careful what you wish for in terms of interventions. But this is the forest plot, and what you see here is that whether you take metabolic, so the females are in the diamonds and the males are in triangles. And for most things you can see, like cardiovascular disease, neurosurgery, they overlap each other. So there's actually no difference by sex for all of these different critical illnesses. We decided to have a look at the lung safe data set. So we had a large data set of around 10,000 patients, around 4,000 of which had ARDS. So we wanted to look at the effect, how we managed men versus women, and if it mattered. So we took just the patients who had ARDS on day 1 or day 2 of their ICU stay, because we have the most data on those patients. And we broke them into category based on sex, males versus females. Now the first thing you notice is there is substantially more males than females. So at least in the ICU cohort, more men get ARDS, and that's well documented. We've known that for a good long time. What we see is they are about the same age. There's no difference in age. Men, as you would expect, are taller, and the females have higher BMI. And this is important for some of the data I'll show you later. In terms of risk factors, there weren't major differences. I mean, particularly in terms of sepsis and pneumonia, they were basically the same. More trauma, lung contusion, and inhalation injury in men. Again, well documented findings in other studies. And in terms of clinician recognition of ARDS, there was no difference. So we were as likely to recognize ARDS in a woman as we were in a man. And in terms of where we did start to see differences was in terms of how they were ventilated. So in regard to invasive ventilator settings, we found that there was no big difference in terms of whether you were in controlled ventilation versus a mode that allowed you to breathe spontaneously. But where there were differences was in terms of tidal volume. So females got higher tidal volumes, whether they were controlled ventilation or spontaneous ventilation. And they had similar peak levels, but then had higher pressures as a result, presumably the tidal volume. So higher peak pressure, higher plateau pressures, and higher driving pressures. And so the absolute numbers differences aren't large, but they are the order of sort of 1 to 2 centimeters of water. And standardized minute ventilation was significantly higher in females. So more aggressive ventilation came back in females. In terms of gas exchange or illness severity, there weren't major differences between the sexes. So P to F was basically the same, pH was the same. The severity profile of ARDS on day 1 was basically the same. So the same proportions with mild, moderate, and severe ARDS. And SOFA scores were similar as well. So there were similarly sick cohorts, the men and the women with ARDS. This is the data, cumulative frequency histograms of curves of tidal volume and plateau pressure. So what you see here is that the female patients have higher tidal volumes, and they have higher plateau pressures compared to the men. And when we look then at sort of the proportions that have protective ventilation, so we define this as a tidal volume of 8 mils per kilo or less and a plateau pressure of 30 centimeters of water or less, what you see is that there's a substantial difference. Only about 50% of females have what we consider to be protective ventilation compared to 75% of men. So a sort of a very substantial difference in protective ventilation rates. So we wanted to try to figure out why that was, in terms of like why would the clinician set different tidal volumes, and we don't fully understand it, to be honest, but we think it's got to do with height differences. So what we see, and again this is well described, is the shorter you are, the higher tidal volumes you get. So if you look here, the tallest patients, whether they were male or female, got the lower tidal volumes, and the highest was here. But of course, as I showed you earlier, the women were shorter, so there was more females in these groups here, right? So, and interestingly, we found that in terms of absolute body weight, this is absolute body weight, not corrected. No matter what body weight you were, you got a higher tidal volume if you were a woman in the study. We looked at adjunctive measures, and interestingly, we found that females were more likely to get an adjunctive measure. They were more likely to get ECMO, and that's interesting because there is data showing good outcomes for females with ECMO, and more likely to get any of the interventions when you added them all up together. So females were more likely to get an adjunctive therapy. And then in terms of outcomes, we saw an interesting pattern in regard to outcomes. We didn't see a major change in ventilator-free days, but females came off the ventilator faster, and they had shorter ICU stays as a group of patients. So they had shorter duration of mechanical ventilation, in 2 days of difference, so pretty substantial difference. And shorter ICU stays, again, 1 to 2 days, depending if you look just at survivors or all patients. So shorter ICU and shorter hospital stays. So good news, it seems, for the female patients. And that's reflected in our Kaplan-Meier. So up to day 90, you were more likely to be alive and off the ventilator if you were a female patient. However, when we looked at actual mortality, there was no difference. So even though females seemed to come off the ventilator faster and come out of the ICU faster, mortality was identical in the two sexes, both ICU mortality and hospital mortality. So what we think is happening here is the females get out faster, but they die in hospital before they leave hospital at the same rate. So they come out of ICU more quickly, but that doesn't translate into a survival event. We then decided to look at confirmed and resolved ARDS. So we published a paper on this data set before, showing that if you look at the patients that reclassified on day 2, it has a much better, it tells you much more about their likely outcomes. So we had shown that on day one ARDS classification, if you have mild, moderate, or severe ARDS, your outcome is different. But there's a much greater spread of difference between the categories if you reclassify on day two, with patients with resolved ARDS on day one doing best, and patients with severe ARDS on day one, 60% of these patients die. So a very high mortality. So we looked at the data set again on day two. And what we found was that if you broke them into the categories, so on day two, about 20% of patients have resolved their ARDS, they no longer fulfill the criteria. Females had a slightly better outcome, although it was not significant. With mild, again, it's the same. Females had a slightly better outcome, but it's not significant. For moderate confirmed ARDS, there's no difference. However, for severe confirmed ARDS, there's a marked worse outcome in females compared to males. And so that's something we're looking at. We've gone back and looked at their severity at baseline. These patients don't seem to be different, the men versus the women at baseline. So it seems to be something that happens in the ICU. We then looked at patterns, geoeconomic patterns, because again we looked at our data set this way before, and we had found differences in outcome depending on where you lived. And we divided the world basically into rest of the world high income, Europe high income, which was the kind of comparator, and then middle income countries. We didn't have any low income countries in the study. So what we found in that study was that if you were in the high income countries outside Europe, you had shorter ICU and shorter hospital stays. But if you looked at mortality, the high income countries had lower mortality compared to middle income countries. So when we looked then at our data set and we looked at outcome, we saw a worse outcome in females in Europe, European high-income countries. And you can see here, so patients in European high-income countries, the females had a 40% mortality compared to a 35% in the males. So, and in the rest of the world, non-European high-income countries, it was actually reversed. Females had a better outcome. So that was interesting to us. And we saw the same pattern for hospital mortality. Females in European countries had a higher mortality. Now, when we corrected this data with the multivariate analysis, we found that this was explained by differences in severity on ARDS. So more patients with severe confirmed ARDS were in European countries, and that's actually what explained it. We then did multivariate analysis to correct for all of the different potential confounding variables. And what we found was that independently, female sex was associated with shorter hospital stay, shorter ICU stay compared to males, and shorter duration of mechanical ventilation. When we looked at outcomes based on confirmed or resolved ARDS, so what we found was there was no difference in the sexes for resolved, mild, or moderate ARDS, but severe ARDS, females had a higher risk of death compared to males, both ICU mortality and hospital mortality. So to kind of summarize, Chairman, we found that ARDS is more frequent in males in our cohort, about a 40-60% ratio. There are some differences in demographics and risk factors. They're not major, but they are there. We found the females were much more likely to get non-protected ventilation, as a 50% versus 75%. And we found outcome differences in females versus males. So shorter time on the ventilator, shorter time in the ICU, similar overall mortality, but when we looked at the severe confirmed ARDS cohort, there was a higher mortality rate in females. So there are clear differences, I think, in regard to how we manage our patients by sex and their outcomes. And I think the data suggests that we need to be very, very careful in how we self-ventilate our patients. With that, I'll close, Chairman. Happy to take questions.